The story of the Roman Empire begins not with triumph but with blood. On the Ides of March in the year 44 before the Common Era, inside the Theatre of Pompey in Rome, a group of senators surrounded Gaius Julius Caesar, the most powerful man in the known world. What followed was not a battle, but an execution. Between 60 and 70 conspirators, led by Marcus Junius Brutus and Gaius Cassius Longinus, stabbed Caesar approximately 23 times. They justified their act as the defense of republican traditions, claiming that Caesar's accumulation of lifelong political authority threatened the very foundations of Rome's 500-year-old republic. The conspirators believed they were saving Rome. They were wrong. Caesar's assassination did not restore the republic. Instead, it precipitated the republic's final destruction and gave birth to an empire that would dominate the Mediterranean world for more than 15 centuries. To understand this transformation, we must look back to the decades before Caesar's death. The Roman Republic, for all its glory and territorial expansion, had been ailing for years. Wealth inequality had reached staggering proportions. The conquest that brought riches to Rome benefited primarily the wealthy senatorial class, while common citizens saw little improvement in their lives. The increase in slave labour following military victories meant fewer opportunities for free Roman workers, impoverishing much of the city's population. This economic disparity created tensions that manifested in unsuccessful rebellions and political gridlock. The army itself had transformed. Once a force motivated by civic duty and honour, the Roman military had become professionalised and its loyalty increasingly personal rather than institutional. Soldiers looked to their generals for land grants and retirement provisions, not to the state. This shift created a dangerous dynamic where ambitious military commanders could leverage their troops' loyalty to pursue political power. The Republic's traditional checks and balances proved inadequate against generals who commanded veteran legions devoted to them personally. Enter the First Triumvirate, an informal political alliance formed in 60 before the Common Era between three of Rome's most powerful men, Julius Caesar, Gnaeus Pompey Magnus, and Marcus Licinius Crassus. This was not an official government structure, but a private arrangement to dominate Roman politics through their combined influence. Caesar brought political acumen and growing military reputation. Pompey contributed military prestige from his eastern conquests. Crassus provided vast wealth from his business enterprises. Together, they bypassed the Senate's authority and shaped policy to suit their interests. The arrangement was inherently unstable. Crassus's death in 53 before the Common Era, during a disastrous campaign against the Parthian Empire, left only two members. The partnership between Caesar and Pompey deteriorated into rivalry. Caesar had spent years conquering Gaul, modern-day France and Belgium, building a loyal and battle-hardened army while accumulating immense wealth and military glory. His commentaries on the Gallic Wars became literary masterpieces that enhanced his reputation back in Rome. Meanwhile, Pompey remained in Italy, growing closer to the senatorial faction that opposed Caesar. The Senate, perceiving Caesar as a threat, demanded in 49 before the Common Era that he disband his army and return to Rome as a private citizen. Caesar refused. Instead, he crossed the Rubicon River, the boundary between Gaul and Italy, with his legion. This act was illegal and tantamount to declaring war on the Senate and Pompey. According to tradition, as Caesar crossed the river, he uttered the phrase that would echo through history, "The die is cast." Civil war had begun. Caesar's military genius and the loyalty of his veterans proved decisive. He pursued Pompey across the Mediterranean, defeating him at the Battle of Pharsalus in 48 before the Common Era. Pompey fled to Egypt, where he was assassinated by agents of the young pharaoh Ptolemy XIII, who sought to curry favour with the seemingly victorious Caesar. When Caesar arrived in Egypt and was presented with Pompey's severed head, sources suggest he wept at the death of his former ally and son-in-law, though whether from genuine grief or political theatre remains debated. In Egypt, Caesar became entangled in a dynastic dispute between Ptolemy and his sister wife Cleopatra VII. Caesar backed Cleopatra, and their political alliance soon became romantic. Their relationship produced a son, Caesarion, though Caesar never officially acknowledged him. When Caesar finally returned to Rome, he brought Cleopatra with him, installing her in a villa outside the city, a move that scandalized conservative Romans. With his opponents defeated, Caesar accumulated unprecedented power. He was appointed Dictator Perpetuo, dictator for life, in 4 or before the Common Era. This title, once used only for temporary emergency authority, now became permanent. Caesar controlled the treasury, commanded the legions through his personal largesse rather than state authority, and intervened in election to place his supporters in office. His image appeared on coins, an honour previously reserved for the gods and dead heroes. He emblazoned his achievements across the city through monuments and public works. Rumours spread that he intended to declare himself king, the most hated title in Roman political culture since the overthrow of the last Etruscan king in 509, before the Common Era. Caesar's increasingly autocratic behaviour alarmed senators across the political spectrum. A conspiracy formed, uniting men who had supported Caesar with those who had opposed him. They called themselves the Liberators, claiming they acted to preserve republican freedom. On the Ides of March 15th, they struck. According to the historian Suetonius, Caesar initially tried to defend himself, but when he saw Brutus among the attackers, he ceased resistance. Whether he actually said "et tu, Brute," as Shakespeare would later write, is uncertain. What is certain is that Caesar died on the floor of the Senate, his blood pooling at the base of a statue of Pompey. The conspirators expected gratitude from the Roman people. They received the opposite. The lower classes, with whom Caesar had been popular, rioted in grief and rage. Marcus Antonius, known to us as Mark Antony, Caesar's loyal lieutenant and consul, seized the opportunity. At Caesar's funeral, Antony delivered a masterful oration that turned public opinion decisively against the assassins. He displayed Caesar's bloody toga and read from his will, which bequeathed gardens to the people and distributed money to every citizen. The mob's fury drove the conspirators from Rome, but Antony soon faced an unexpected rival. Caesar's will contained a surprise that would reshape Roman history. The dictator had posthumously adopted his 18-year-old great-nephew, Gaius Octavius, making him his primary heir and granting him Caesar's name and fortune. Octavius, a sickly youth studying in Apollonia when Caesar died, immediately sailed to Italy to claim his inheritance. He took the name Gaius Julius Caesar Octavianus, though we know him as Octavian. Despite his youth and lack of military experience, Octavian possessed political genius and ruthless determination. What followed was a complex dance of alliance and betrayal. Initially, Octavian joined with Marcus Aemilius Lepidus, Caesar's former second-in-command, and eventually reconciled with Antony. The three formed the Second Triumvirate in 43 before the Common Era, this time as an official magistracy with legal authority to reorganize the state. Unlike the informal First Triumvirate, this alliance had legal sanction and dictatorial powers. Their first act was a proscription, a legalized purge of political enemies. Hundreds of senators and thousands of equestrians were declared outlaws, their property confiscated, with rewards offered for their heads. Among the victims was Marcus Tullius Cicero, Rome's greatest orator, and a harsh critic of Antony, who was hunted down and killed. The triumvirs then pursued Caesar's assassins. At the Battle of Philippi in 42 before the Common Era, Brutus and Cassius led the last Republican army against the combined forces of Octavian and Antony. After two engagements, both of Caesar's chief assassins committed suicide. The Republic's final defenders had fallen. The triumvirs divided the Roman world among themselves. Antony received the wealthy east, Octavian took the west, and Lepidus was assigned Africa. This arrangement could not last. Lepidus attempted to assert control over Sicily in 36 before the Common Era, but was outmaneuvered by Octavian. His legions deserted him, and he was forced into exile, stripped of political power though, allowed to retain the honorary position of Pontifex Maximus, chief priest of Rome's state religion. The partnership between Octavian and Antony proved even more volatile. Antony travelled to the east and soon fell under the spell of Cleopatra, who had been Caesar's lover, and was now one of the wealthiest and most powerful monarchs in the Mediterranean. Their relationship was both romantic and strategic. Cleopatra offered Antony the vast resources of Egypt while he provided military protection for her throne. Together they had 3 children and conducted themselves as Hellenistic monarchs, adopting Eastern customs and court rituals that seemed un-Roman to observers in Italy. Octavian recognized a propaganda opportunity. He portrayed Antony as bewitched by an Oriental seductress, abandoning Roman values for Egyptian decadence. When Antony formalized his alliance with Cleopatra and made arrangements that seemed to benefit Egypt at Rome's expense, Octavian obtained what he claimed was Antony's will. The document, whether genuine or forged, suggested that Antony intended to be buried in Alexandria, and planned to leave Roman territories to his children by Cleopatra. The revelation scandalized Rome. The Senate, at Octavian's urging, stripped Antony of his powers and declared war not on him directly, but on Cleopatra. The final confrontation came in 31 before the Common Era at Actium, off the western coast of Greece. Antony and Cleopatra commanded a large fleet and substantial land forces. Octavian's admiral, Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa, proved the superior naval tactician. The Battle of Actium turned into a rout. Cleopatra's ships broke away and fled toward Egypt. Antony followed her, abandoning his remaining forces. Octavian pursued them to Alexandria. Facing certain defeat, first Antony and then Cleopatra committed suicide. Their deaths in 30 before the Common Era marked the final extinction of the Hellenistic monarchies descended from Alexander the Great's empire. Egypt, the last independent Hellenistic kingdom, became a Roman province. Octavian stood alone, master of the entire Roman world. The civil wars that had ravaged the Mediterranean for nearly 2 decades were over. What would he do with his victory? The young man who had risen through violence and proscription now faced the challenge of creating lasting peace. The Republic was dead, killed by decades of political dysfunction and civil war. But Romans still cherished republican traditions and feared monarchical power. Octavian needed to create a new system that provided stability without appearing to be a kingship. His solution was brilliant in its subtlety. In 27 before the Common Era, Octavian appeared before the Senate and dramatically offered to resign his extraordinary powers and restore the Republic. The Senate, carefully orchestrated by Octavian's supporters, refused. Instead, they granted him a proconsular command over Spain, Gaul, and Syria, the provinces where most of Rome's legions were stationed. They also bestowed upon him a new name, Augustus, meaning the revered one, or the illustrious one. This title carried religious overtones without the political baggage of king or dictator. Modern historians mark this moment, January 16th, 27 before the Common Era, as the beginning of the Roman Empire. Augustus, as we must now call him, had created the Principate. The term comes from princeps, meaning first citizen, the title Augustus preferred. Outwardly, the Republic continued. The Senate still met, magistrates were elected, and laws were passed. But the reality was that Augustus held ultimate authority. He controlled the army through the loyalty he had carefully cultivated among the soldiers and officers. He held imperium, supreme command, that overrode all other authorities in his provinces. He possessed tribunixia potestas, the power of a tribune, which made his person sacrosanct and gave him veto power over any act of government. He served as Pontifex Maximus, chief priest, giving him religious authority. He commanded Rome's finances and personally directed foreign policy. Yet Augustus was careful never to appear as a tyrant. He consulted the Senate, maintained republican forms, and presented himself as merely the first among equals. He lived in a relatively modest house on the Palatine Hill rather than building an ostentatious palace. He wore simple clothing and affected traditional Roman values. When a senator once suggested that he should be granted more powers, Augustus is said to have replied that he had enough. This careful performance of republican virtue helped him maintain support among the aristocracy, while his control of the military and treasury ensured he remained in power. Augustus lived to be 75 years old, dying in 14 of the Common Era. His reign lasted 41 years, longer than any Roman ruler before him. In that time, he transformed Rome from a war-torn republic into a stable empire. He established the administrative framework that would govern Rome for centuries. He created a professional standing army of approximately 150,000 men, organized into 28 legions plus auxiliary forces stationed along the frontiers. He reformed the tax system, created a civil service, built roads and aqueducts, and patronized the arts on an unprecedented scale. He found Rome a city of brick and left it a city of marble, or so he boasted. Most importantly, Augustus established peace. The Pax Romana, the Roman peace, began with his reign and would last for 2 centuries. After generations of civil war and military chaos, the Mediterranean world entered an era of unprecedented stability and prosperity. The gates of the Temple of Janus, which stood open in times of war and closed during peace, were shut 3 times during Augustus's reign, an event that had occurred only twice in the entire previous history of Rome. His political settlement, though born from civil war and The destruction of republican government created the framework for one of history's most successful empires. The Republic was dead. The empire had begun. The peace that Augustus established did not mean the empire ceased to expand or that warfare ended. Rather, it meant that internal civil wars largely ceased, and that the borders were secured and gradually extended. Under Augustus and his successors, Rome reached the zenith of its power, wealth, and cultural achievement. This era, lasting roughly from 27 before the Common Era to 180 of the Common Era, represented the Pax Romana at its fullest expression. Augustus himself oversaw significant territorial expansion. He completed the conquest of Hispania, bringing the entire Iberian Peninsula under Roman control. He extended Roman authority into the Alpine regions, incorporating Rhaetia and Noricum. He annexed Egypt as a personal imperial province. He pushed Rome's frontiers to the Danube River in the Balkans and attempted to extend them to the Elbe River in Germania. This last effort ended in disaster in the year 9 of the Common Era, when 3 entire legions, approximately 15,000 men, were annihilated in the Teutoburg forest by a coalition of Germanic tribes led by Arminius, a chieftain who had served in the Roman auxiliary forces. The defeat traumatized Augustus. According to the historian Suetonius, the elderly emperor would sometimes bang his head against doors shouting, "Quintilius Varus, give me back my legions!" The disaster prompted a strategic reorientation. Instead of pushing beyond the Rhine, Rome would defend the Rhine-Danube frontier line, creating a border that would largely hold for the next 4 centuries. The succession of Augustus set another crucial precedent. He had no surviving sons, and his favoured grandsons died young. He was forced to adopt his stepson Tiberius, the son of his wife Livia by her first marriage, as his heir. This established a pattern where emperors would adopt capable successors rather than rely solely on biological inheritance, a system that would later produce some of Rome's greatest rulers. Tiberius ruled from 14 to 37 of the Common Era. A skilled general and competent administrator, he nevertheless proved unpopular. His dour personality and tendency to withdraw from public life created an atmosphere of suspicion and fear. He eventually retired to the island of Capri, governing through correspondence while the praetorian prefect Sejanus wielded increasing power in Rome until Tiberius had him executed for treason. Despite these troubles, Tiberius maintained the administrative and military structures Augustus had created. It was during his reign that Jesus of Nazareth was crucified in the province of Judea, an event that went unnoticed by Roman historians but would eventually transform the empire more profoundly than any military campaign. Tiberius's successor, Gaius Julius Caesar, Augustus Germanicus, known as Caligula, demonstrated the dangers inherent in the imperial system. Ascending to power in 37 at age 24 with no administrative experience, Caligula began his reign with promise, but soon descended into what sources describe as madness. The historical accounts, primarily from later writers hostile to his memory, paint a picture of increasing paranoia, sadism and megalomania. He allegedly declared himself a living god, demanded divine honours, engaged in sexual excess and committed random acts of cruelty. Whether all the lurid stories are true remains debated, but his erratic behaviour ultimately led to his assassination by members of his own Praetorian Guard in 41 of the Common Era. His reign demonstrated that the concentration of power in one man's hands created vulnerabilities when that man proved unfit to rule. The Praetorian Guard discovered Claudius, Caligula's uncle, hiding behind a curtain in the palace during the chaos following the assassination. They proclaimed him emperor, establishing another dangerous precedent. The military, or at least the emperor's personal guard, could make and unmake emperors. Claudius ruled from 41 to 54, and despite being physically disabled and underestimated by the senatorial class, he proved an effective administrator. He expanded the civil service, initiated major public works including aqueducts and harbours, and oversaw the conquest of Britain in 43, making it a Roman province for the first time. This invasion was partly motivated by the need for military glory to legitimise his rule, partly by the economic appeal of Britain's mineral resources, and partly by strategic concerns about Britain serving as a refuge for Rome's enemies in Gaul. Claudius was succeeded by his adopted son Nero in 54. The young emperor initially ruled under the guidance of his tutor, the philosopher Seneca, and the Praetorian prefect Burrus. The first 5 years of Nero's reign were competent enough, but as he matured, he increasingly indulged his artistic passions and authoritarian impulses. He performed publicly as an actor and musician, scandalizing the aristocracy who considered such activities beneath an emperor's dignity. He was accused of murdering his mother Agrippina and his wife Octavia. When a great fire destroyed much of Rome in 64, rumours spread that Nero had started it to clear land for a new palace, though this is likely slander. Nero blamed Christians for the fire, initiating Rome's first major persecution of the new faith. He had some Christians executed as public spectacles, a persecution that would create martyrs and strengthen rather than destroy the Christian community. Nero's reign ended in 68 when multiple provinces revolted and the Senate declared him a public enemy. He fled Rome and committed suicide, allegedly uttering, "What an artist dies in me, Bo," as his final words. His death without an heir sparked civil war. In the year 69, known as the Year of the Four Emperors, Galba, Otho, Vitellius, and finally Vespasian fought for control. Vespasian, a general who had been conducting the war against a Jewish revolt in Judea, emerged victorious. He founded the Flavian dynasty and restored stability. Vespasian ruled from 69 to 79. A capable military leader and shrewd politician from a middle-class background, he restored discipline to the army and finances to the depleted treasury. He was succeeded by his sons Titus and then Domitian. Titus's brief reign from 79 to 81 saw the completion of the Colosseum, the vast amphitheatre that became Rome's most iconic building. During his reign, Mount Vesuvius erupted in 79, destroying Pompeii and Herculaneum, preserving them for posterity under volcanic ash. Domitian ruled from 81 to 96, a capable but increasingly paranoid autocrat whose reign ended in assassination. The Senate then elevated Marcus Cocceius Nerva, an elderly, childless senator, to the purple. Nerva's most important act was adopting as his heir Marcus Ulpius Traianus, known as Trajan, the governor of Upper Germany and a distinguished general. This adoption inaugurated Rome's Golden Age. For the next 84 years, from 96 to 180, 5 exceptional emperors ruled in succession, each adopting a capable successor rather than passing power to a biological son. Biblical historians call them the 5 good emperors: Nerva, Trajan, Hadrian, Antoninus Pius, and Marcus Aurelius. Trajan ruled from 98 to 117 and proved one of Rome's greatest emperors. Under his leadership, the empire reached its maximum territorial extent. He conquered Dacia, roughly modern Romania, incorporating its gold mines into the empire and solving the strategic problem of the Dacian threat to the Danube frontier. His victory was commemorated by Trajan's Column in Rome, a marble pillar covered in a spiralling frieze depicting the Dacian Wars, one of the ancient world's great artistic achievements. Trajan then turned east, launching an invasion of the Parthian Empire. His forces captured the Parthian capital of Ctesiphon and reached the Persian Gulf, the furthest East Roman armies ever campaigned. But the conquest proved unsustainable. As Trajan withdrew, the newly conquered territories erupted in rebellion. The elderly emperor died in 117 while returning to Rome, allegedly adopting his cousin Hadrian as his heir on his deathbed, though the adoption's legitimacy was questioned. Hadrian, ruling from 117 to 138, represented a dramatic shift in imperial policy. Where Trajan had been expansionist, Hadrian was consolidationist. He withdrew from much of Trajan's eastern conquests, establishing the Euphrates River as Rome's frontier with Parthia. He toured the provinces extensively, more than any previous emperor, inspecting defences and improving administration. In Britain, he ordered the construction of Hadrian's Wall, a stone barrier stretching 80 Roman miles across northern England from coast to coast, demarcating the empire's northern limit and controlling movement between Roman Britain and Caledonia. Similar, sir. Fortifications were built along the Rhine and Danube. Hadrian was also a passionate Philhellene, an admirer of Greek culture. He beautified Athens, completed the Temple of Olympian Zeus there, and founded cities across the east. In Judea, his decision to build a Roman city on the ruins of Jerusalem and prohibit circumcision sparked the Bar Kokhba revolt from 132 to 136, a devastating war that resulted in massive Jewish casualties and the near depopulation of Judea. Antoninus Pius ruled from 138 to 161, one of the empire's most stable reigns. He never left Italy during his entire 23-year rule, governing through capable subordinates. The empire enjoyed peace and prosperity. In Britain, his legates pushed north beyond Hadrian's Wall and built the Antonine Wall across the narrower isthmus of modern Scotland, though this frontier proved unsustainable and was later abandoned. Antoninus earned his cognomen Pius for his devotion to deifying and honouring his predecessor Hadrian, whom the Senate had wanted to condemn. Marcus Aurelius, the last of the 5 good emperors, ruled from 161 to 180. A philosopher emperor trained in Stoic philosophy, he wrote the Meditations, a personal journal of philosophical reflections that remains influential to this day. But his reign was not peaceful. He spent years campaigning on the Danube frontier against Germanic and Sarmatian tribes who pressed hard against Rome's borders. The empire also faced a devastating plague, likely smallpox, brought back from the east by soldiers returning from Parthia. The Antonine Plague, as it's called, may have killed up to 5 million people across the empire between 165 and 180, weakening the economy and military manpower. These 2 centuries of the Pax Romana saw the empire at its zenith. At its greatest extent under Trajan, the Roman Empire controlled approximately 6.5 million square kilometres. It stretched from Britain to the Euphrates River, from the Rhine and Danube to the Sahara Desert, encompassing the entire Mediterranean basin, which the Romans called Mare Nostrum, our sea. Within these boundaries lived an estimated 60 to 70 million people, perhaps a third of the world's population at the time. The Pax Romana brought unprecedented economic integration and prosperity. A vast network of roads connected the provinces, facilitating trade and communication. Roman merchant ships sailed from Egypt to Britain, from Spain to Syria, carrying grain, wine, olive oil, pottery, metals, textiles, and luxury goods. The Mediterranean, cleared of piracy by Roman naval power, became a highway for commerce. Cities grew and flourished. While Rome itself may have housed up to 1 million inhabitants, provincial capitals like Alexandria in Egypt, Antioch in Syria, Carthage in North Africa, and Lugdunum in Gaul became major urban centres. Roman law, standardised across the empire, provided a framework for commerce and dispute resolution that far surpassed the inconsistent tribal codes that had preceded Roman rule. Legal principles developed during this period, codified later in the Corpus Juris Civilis, form the foundation of civil law systems across the modern world. The Roman legal concept that a person is innocent until proven guilty, that contracts should be honoured, that property rights should be protected, that judges should base decisions on written law rather than arbitrary whim. These ideas, now taken for granted, were revolutionary in the ancient world. The empire's infrastructure was extraordinary. Roman engineers built approximately 80,000 kilometres of paved roads, engineering marvels that in many cases remained in use for over 1,000 years. The saying, "all roads lead to Rome," reflected reality. From the golden milestone in the Forum, roads radiated outward to every province. These roads, built in layers of stone and gravel, and often perfectly straight for miles, enabled rapid movement of troops, government couriers, and merchants. The system included bridges, tunnels, and way stations providing food and lodging at regular intervals. Roman aqueducts brought clean water to cities across the empire. The city of Rome itself was served by 11 major aqueducts, some stretching over 50 miles from mountain springs to deliver hundreds of millions of litres of water daily. This water supply enabled the famous Roman baths, massive public facilities that served not just for bathing, but as social centres where citizens gathered to socialise, exercise, and conduct business. The baths were marvels of engineering using hypercore systems to heat floors and walls, creating the first known central heating systems. Roman concrete, mixture of lime mortar, volcanic ash, and aggregate, enabled construction projects of unprecedented scale. The Pantheon in Rome, completed under Hadrian, features a concrete dome that remains, after nearly 2,000 years, the world's largest unreinforced concrete dome. Roman concrete was in some ways superior to modern concrete, particularly in its ability to withstand water erosion, a mystery scientists are still trying to understand. Cultural achievement flourished during the Pax Romana. This period produced many of Latin literature's greatest works. Virgil's Aeneid, written under Augustus, became Rome's national epic, connecting Roman origins to the Trojan War and celebrating Augustus's role as the founder of a new age. Ovid's Metamorphoses retold Greek and Roman myths in elegant verse. Horace's odes celebrated Augustan values. Livy wrote his massive history of Rome from its legendary founding to his own time. Under later emperors, historians like Tacitus and Suetonius recorded the deeds and scandals of the imperial household. Juvenal's satires skewered Roman society. Martial's epigrams captured daily life. The Stoic philosopher Seneca wrote tragedies and ethical treatises. The orator and teacher Quintilian shaped rhetorical education. Pliny the Elder compiled a massive encyclopedia of natural history. His nephew, Pliny the Younger, left letters providing invaluable glimpses of provincial administration and Roman social life. Greek literature also flourished under Roman patronage. Plutarch wrote his Parallel Lives, comparing famous Greeks and Romans, a work that has influenced writers from Shakespeare to the present. Lucian of Samosata produced satirical dialogues. Arrian preserved the history of Alexander the Great. Appian wrote a comprehensive Roman history. Pausanias created a travel guide to Greece that remains an invaluable source for ancient geography and monuments. The physician Galen developed medical theories that would dominate Western medicine for over a millennium. The empire was also increasingly diverse and cosmopolitan. People moved freely across provincial boundaries. A merchant from Syria might do business in Gaul. Soldiers from Britain served on the Danube frontier. An Egyptian could serve as a magistrate in Spain. While Rome remained the symbolic heart, Constantinople in the east, though not yet the capital, grew in importance. Latin dominated in the west, Greek in the east, but educated people were often bilingual. Local languages and customs persisted, particularly in Egypt and the Levant, but a common Roman culture provided unity. Religious life remained diverse. Traditional Roman polytheism, with its civic rituals and emperor cult, provided official worship. But the empire was religiously tolerant, allowing local deities and practices as long as they didn't threaten public order or refuse to honour the emperor. This tolerance enabled the spread of mystery cults from the east, religions promising personal salvation through initiation into secret rites. The cults of Isis and Serapis from Egypt, Cybele from Anatolia, and Mithras from Persia attracted followers across the empire. Judaism was practiced freely, though Rome sometimes struggled to understand Jewish monotheism and refusal to worship the emperor. Into this diverse religious landscape came Christianity. What began as a Jewish sect in an obscure province grew, slowly at first, into a movement that spread across the empire. The reasons for Christianity's success are debated, but several factors helped. Its message of salvation regardless of social status appealed to the poor and to women. Its communities provided social support networks. Its martyrs, killed in periodic persecutions, inspired rather than deterred converts. Its theology, influenced by Greek philosophy, appealed to educated people seeking intellectual depth. Its organizational structure, with bishops overseeing communities of believers, provided stability. By the end of the 2nd century, Christian communities existed in most major cities, though they remained a small minority of the total population, perhaps 3 to 5%. The Pax Romana ended with the death of Marcus Aurelius in 180. His decision to name his biological son Commodus as his successor, breaking the pattern of adoption, proved disastrous. Commodus, unlike the careful rulers who preceded him, was unstable, possibly mentally ill. He neglected administration, squandered the treasury on lavish games and personal pleasures, and fancied himself a reincarnation of Hercules, even fighting in the arena as a gladiator, an activity the Senate considered utterly degrading for an emperor. His erratic behaviour and the corruption of his advisors created instability. On the last day of 192, he was strangled in his bath by a wrestling partner, ending the dynasty and the Golden Age. What followed was civil war. The empire had become so dependent on the quality of its emperor that when a bad one ascended, and when the succession was disputed, the entire system threatened to collapse. The year of the 5 emperors in 193 saw Pertinax, Didius Julianus, Pescennius Niger, Clodius Albinus, and finally Septimius Severus claim the throne. Severus emerged victorious and founded a new dynasty, but his reign marks the beginning of a darker period. He famously advised his sons, "Enrich the soldiers and scorn all other men," a philosophy that would have dire consequences. The army's loyalty had to be bought with ever higher pay and bonuses, straining the treasury and encouraging future military coups. The golden age of the Pax Romana was over. Challenges that would nearly destroy the empire lay ahead. The 3rd century of the Common Era tested the Roman Empire as never before. In a period spanning from 235 to 284, the empire nearly collapsed under the combined weight of civil war, foreign invasion, economic crisis, and plague. Historians call this the crisis of the 3rd century, a time when the survival of Rome itself hung in the balance. The crisis began with the assassination of Emperor Severus Alexander in 235. Alexander had been the last of the Severan dynasty, ruling under the domination of his mother Julia Mamaea. When his attempts to buy peace from Germanic tribes rather than fight them angered his soldiers, they murdered both emperor and empress near Mogontiacum, modern Mainz. The soldiers then proclaimed their commander, Maximinus Thrax, as emperor. Maximinus was the first soldier emperor, a man who had risen from the ranks rather than from the senatorial or equestrian class. His accession established a dangerous precedent. The army, not the Senate or any constitutional process, would determine who ruled Rome. What followed was chaos. Over the next 50 years, more than 50 men claimed the imperial title. Most ruled for only months before being murdered by rivals or their own troops. Few died natural deaths. The average reign lasted just 2 to 3 years. This constant turnover meant no emperor had time to address the empire's underlying problems. Each new ruler's primary concern was survival, eliminating rivals, and buying the loyalty of whichever army faction had elevated him to power. The military situation deteriorated dramatically. On the Rhine and Danube frontiers, Germanic tribes pressed harder than ever. The Goths, a confederation that had migrated from Scandinavia to the Black Sea region, proved particularly dangerous. In 251, at the Battle of Abritus in modern Bulgaria, the Goths defeated and killed Emperor Decius, the first Roman emperor killed in battle by foreign enemies in over 2 centuries. They repeatedly raided deep into the Balkans and even into Asia Minor. The Alemanni, a Germanic confederation, broke through the Rhine frontier and devastated Gaul, at one point reaching as far as northern Italy before being stopped. The Franks, another Germanic group, raided across the Rhine into Gaul and even Spain. The eastern frontier collapsed under pressure from a new power. The Parthian Empire, Rome's traditional rival, had fallen to a new Persian dynasty, the Sassanids, who proved far more aggressive and capable than their predecessors. Under Shapur I, Sassanid Persia launched major invasions into Roman territory. In 260, at the Battle of Edessa, Persian forces achieved the unthinkable. They captured a Roman emperor. Valerian, who had been campaigning in the east, was taken prisoner. According to Persian sources, Shapur used the captive emperor as a footstool when mounting his horse, the ultimate humiliation. Valerian died in captivity, and his stuffed body was allegedly displayed in a Persian temple as a trophy. No Roman emperor had ever suffered such a fate. The empire's troubles multiplied. Economic crisis gripped the Roman world. The constant warfare drained the treasury. Emperors debased the coinage, reducing the silver content of the denarius to maintain payments to the army. This caused runaway inflation. A denarius that had been 90% silver under Augustus contained less than 5% by the 260s. Prices skyrocketed. Trade networks broke down as roads became unsafe and merchants feared confiscation. The plague returned, probably smallpox, sweeping through the empire multiple times between 249 and 270, each outbreak killing thousands and further weakening the economy and military manpower. The empire fragmented. Around 260, the governor of Germania Inferior, Postumus, declared independence and established the Gallic Empire, controlling Britain, Gaul, and Spain. This breakaway state lasted 15 years, maintaining its own emperors, minting its own coins, and successfully defending against Germanic invasions while ignoring the central government in Rome. Meanwhile, in the east, the merchant city of Palmyra, under Queen Zenobia, carved out its own domain. Taking advantage of Roman weakness following Valerian's capture, Zenobia's forces conquered Egypt, Syria, and much of Asia Minor, creating the Palmyrene Empire. By 270, the Roman Empire had effectively been divided into 3 separate states, each with its own ruler. Yet Rome survived. The military, despite its role in creating instability through constant coups, also provided the solution. A series of tough, capable soldier emperors from the Illyrian provinces, the Balkans region, gradually restored order. These emperors, though they often came to power through violence and ruled briefly, were effective military commanders who defeated foreign invaders and slowly reunified the empire. Claudius Gothicus, ruling from 268 to 270, earned his cognomen by defeating a massive Gothic invasion at the Battle of Naissus in 269, killing approximately 50,000 invaders and breaking Gothic power for a generation. He died of plague shortly after, but his successor Aurelian continued the restoration. Aurelian, ruling from 270 to 275, deserves recognition as one of Rome's greatest emperors despite his brief reign. He drove the Alemanni out of Italy. He reconquered the Palmyrene Empire, defeating Zenobia and bringing her back to Rome in golden chains for his triumph, before generously allowing her to retire to a villa. He reintegrated the Gallic Empire through a combination of military pressure and diplomacy. By 274, the Roman Empire was geographically whole again. Aurelian earned the title Restorer of the World. He also took a symbolic but significant step. He abandoned the old republican pretense that the emperor was merely first citizen. He adopted the title Dominus et Deus, Lord and God, openly embracing the reality of absolute monarchy. He built massive new walls around Rome itself, the Aurelian walls, acknowledging that even the capital was no longer safe from barbarian raids. These walls still stand today, a testament to the crisis that prompted their construction. Aurelian's assassination in 275 by officers who mistakenly believed he planned to execute them demonstrated the continuing instability, but his successors maintained his achievements. The crisis gradually ebbed. By 284, when Diocletian became emperor, the worst had passed. The empire had survived, but it was permanently changed. The army had grown larger, more expensive, and more powerful. The frontiers were more heavily militarized. The economy was damaged. The population was smaller. The optimism of the Pax Romana had given way to a grimmer reality, and the political system required complete overhaul. Diocletian, a soldier from Dalmatia of humble origins, understood this. Unlike his predecessors who tried to rule the vast empire alone, he decided to share power. In 286, he appointed his trusted general Maximian as co-emperor, assigning him authority over the western provinces, while Diocletian controlled the east. This division recognized the reality that the empire had become too large for one man to defend effectively. But Diocletian went further. In 293, he established the Tetrarchy, ruled by 4. Each senior emperor, called an Augustus, appointed a junior emperor, called a Caesar, as his designated successor and helper. Diocletian chose Galerius as his Caesar. Maximian selected Constantius Chlorus. The empire was divided into 4 administrative regions, each ruled by one of the tetrarchs. The system was designed to solve multiple problems simultaneously, provided enough military commanders to defend all frontiers. It established clear succession, preventing civil wars when an emperor died. It decentralized administration while maintaining overall coordination. The Tetrarchy worked, at least initially. The 4 rulers campaigned successfully against external enemies and suppressed internal revolts. They defeated the Persians in the east, reconquered Britain after a rebellion, and stabilized the frontiers. Diocletian also instituted sweeping reforms. He massively expanded the army, increasing it to perhaps 450,000 men or more. He separated civil and military authority in the provinces to prevent governors from using provincial armies to launch coups. He reorganized the provinces themselves, dividing larger ones into smaller units to make administration more efficient and rebellion harder. He reformed the tax system, implementing a new assessment called the indictio, based on agricultural productivity and periodic census data. He attempted to control inflation through the Edict on Maximum Prices in 301, fixing prices for goods and services throughout the empire, though this effort largely failed as markets found ways around the restrictions. Diocletian also initiated the Great Persecution against Christians. Starting in 303, he ordered the destruction of Christian churches and scriptures, the dismissal of Christians from government positions, and the arrest of clergy. The persecution was motivated partly by religious conservatism and partly by the belief that the empire's troubles stemmed from neglect of the traditional gods. The persecution varied in intensity across regions. It was harsh in the east under Diocletian and Galerius, but milder in the west under Constantius. While thousands of Christians were martyred, the persecution ultimately failed. Christianity had grown too large and too organized to be suppressed through force. Moreover, Christian communities' cohesion and willingness to die for their faith won admiration even from some pagans. In 305, Diocletian did something unprecedented. He voluntarily abdicated. He convinced Maximian to do the same. The two Caesars, Galerius and Constantius, became the new Augusti and appointed their own Caesars. Diocletian retired to a massive palace he had built on the Dalmatian coast near his birthplace, spending his remaining years in his gardens. When urged to return to politics during later crises, he allegedly replied that if people could see the cabbages he grew, they would understand why he refused. But the Tetrarchy's succession system immediately broke down. Constantius died in 306 in Britain, and his army proclaimed his son Constantine as Augustus, bypassing the official Tetrarchic succession. Meanwhile, Maxentius, son of the retired Maximian, seized power in Italy. Multiple claimants fought for supremacy. The empire descended once again into civil war. This conflict would ultimately produce one of history's most consequential rulers and transform not just Rome, but the entire Western world. Constantine, born around 252, was the son of Constantius Chlorus and Helena, a woman of humble origins whom Constantius later divorced for political reasons. When his father died in Eboracum, modern York, in 306, the legions stationed in Britain proclaimed Constantine as Augustus. This violated Diocletian's Tetrarchic system, which provided for orderly succession without hereditary claims. But the army's will prevailed. Constantine controlled Britain and Gaul. Several rivals claimed authority elsewhere. The empire again fragmented into competing states. The most immediate threat came from Maxentius, who controlled Italy and Africa from his base in Rome. After years of maneuvering and smaller conflicts, Constantine marched into Italy in 312. Maxentius, despite having superior numbers, chose to meet Constantine in open battle at the Milvian Bridge over the Tiber River just north of Rome. What happened next would become one of history's most famous stories, though separating fact from later legend is difficult. According to Christian sources written after the event, Constantine experienced a vision before the battle. He saw a cross of light in the sky, bearing the inscription "In this sign conquer" in Greek. That night, he allegedly dreamed that Christ instructed him to mark his soldiers' shields with a Christian symbol, the Chi Rho, a monogram of the first two letters of Christ's name in Greek. Constantine obeyed. The next day, October 28, 312, his forces defeated Maxentius's larger army. Maxentius himself drowned in the Tiber trying to retreat across the collapsing Milvian Bridge. Whether Constantine actually experienced these visions, or whether they were later inventions to explain his conversion, is debated. What matters is that Constantine credited the Christian God with his victory and became Christianity's imperial patron. The following year, 313, Constantine and his co-emperor Licinius, who controlled the East, issued the Edict of Milan. This proclamation granted religious freedom to all people within the empire and specifically legalized Christianity. Christians who had been persecuted could now worship openly. More than that, Constantine actively favoured Christianity. He granted tax exemptions to Christian clergy, funded church construction, and involved himself in theological disputes, beginning a relationship between church and state that would define European history for over a millennium. Constantine's path to sole rule took years. He eliminated Licinius in 324 after a series of conflicts, becoming the undisputed master of the entire Roman world. But Constantine made a decision that would prove as momentous as his adoption of Christianity. He founded a new capital. The city of Rome, with its powerful senate and pagan traditions, represented the old order. Constantine wanted a city that would be Christian from its foundation, located strategically to defend the wealthier and more threatened eastern provinces. He chose Byzantium, an ancient Greek city on the Bosporus Strait, the waterway connecting the Black Sea to the Mediterranean. The location was nearly perfect, easily defensible on a peninsula, positioned to control trade between Europe and Asia, close to both the Danube and eastern frontiers. Constantine massively expanded and rebuilt the city, decorating it with monuments and artwork looted from across the empire. He officially inaugurated the city as the new imperial capital on May 11, 30, naming it Constantinople, the city of Constantine. The new capital represented more than geography. It symbolized transformation. While Rome had been the heart of a pagan Mediterranean empire, Constantinople would be the center of a Christian universal monarchy. While Rome maintained republican pretenses and senatorial traditions, Constantinople was built around the imperial palace and court. The shift eastward reflected demographic and economic reality. The eastern provinces were wealthier, more populous, and more urbanized than the west. They had also suffered less during the 3rd century crisis. Moving the capital east positioned imperial power where it could be most effectively exercised. Constantine also involved himself deeply in Christian theological disputes. When controversy erupted over the teachings of Arius, a priest from Alexandria who argued that Christ was a created being and therefore subordinate to God the Father, Constantine convened the Council of Nicaea in 325. This assembly of bishops from across the empire represented the first ecumenical council of the Christian Church. Under Constantine's watchful presence, the council condemned Arianism and formulated the Nicene Creed, a statement of orthodox Christian belief affirming that Christ was of one substance with the Father, fully divine and co-eternal. Constantine enforced the council's decision with imperial authority, establishing the precedent that the emperor would involve himself in defining Christian orthodoxy. Constantine died in 327 near Nicomedia while preparing for a campaign against Persia. He was baptized on his deathbed, having delayed the sacrament until then, possibly because baptism was believed to wash away all sins and Christians could only be baptized once. His reign fundamentally transformed the empire. He had made Christianity not just legal but privileged. He had built Constantinople as a Christian capital. He had established models for how Christian emperors should relate to the church. And he had demonstrated that Christianity and imperial power could be mutually reinforcing. His sons and successors fought among themselves, as Constantine's sons often did. Constantine II, Constantius II, and Constans divided the empire before conflicts eliminated all but Constantius by 350. Constantius ruled until 361, continuing his father's pro-Christian policies and actively promoting the Nicene orthodoxy against Arianism, though he also experimented with semi-Arian theology himself at times. His cousin and successor Julian, who ruled from 361 to 363, attempted to reverse Constantine's religious revolution. Julian, raised Christian, had secretly embraced traditional paganism as a young man. Upon becoming emperor, he openly declared his pagan beliefs and attempted to revive the old religion. He reopened pagan temples, restored their properties, performed sacrifices, and wrote philosophical treatises defending paganism. He also tried to undermine Christianity without directly persecuting it, instead removing its privileges and attempting to encourage internal divisions. Christians called him Julian the Apostate, the betrayer of the faith. Julian's pagan restoration failed. He died in 363 during a campaign against Persia, wounded by a spear, according to Christian tradition, hurled by his own disaffected soldiers or even by a Christian saint. With his death, the pagan restoration died too. His successors were Christians who continued developing the Christian empire. By the end of the 4th century, Christianity had moved from persecuted sect to state religion. Emperor Theodosius I, ruling from 379 to 395, made Christianity the empire's official religion through the Edict of Thessalonica in 380, which declared Nicene Christianity the only legitimate imperial religion. Pagan worship was prohibited. Temples were closed or converted to churches. The Olympic Games were banned. Heretical Christian sects faced persecution. The transformation was complete. The empire that had crucified Christ now proclaimed itself Christian. This transformation brought benefits and costs. Christianity provided ideological unity to an increasingly diverse empire. It gave purpose and meaning to imperial authority, portraying the emperor as God's viceroy on earth. It created networks of social support through churches and monasteries, but it also created new divisions. Theological disputes became matters of state. Heretics faced not just spiritual condemnation but political persecution. The relationship between emperor and church remained ambiguous, sometimes cooperative, sometimes tense. And forcing religious uniformity on the empire's diverse populations created resentment in places like Egypt and Syria, where local forms of Christianity diverged from imperial orthodoxy. The late 4th century also saw growing problems along the frontiers. The Huns, a nomadic people from the Asian steppes, began migrating westward, driving other peoples before them. Germanic tribes, faced with destruction by the Huns, sought refuge in the empire. In 376, the Goths, a Germanic people who had lived for generations near the Danube, requested permission to settle within Roman territory. Emperor Valens granted permission, intending to use them as soldiers and farmers. But Roman officials exploited and abused the Gothic refugees. The Goths revolted. At the Battle of Adrianople in 378, Gothic cavalry destroyed a Roman army and killed Emperor Valens. Adrianople shocked the Roman world. It demonstrated that the empire could not necessarily defeat barbarian armies even on Roman soil. Theodosius managed to pacify the Goths through a combination of military action and negotiation, settling them in the Balkans as foederati, federate allies who would fight for Rome while maintaining their own leadership. This solution worked temporarily, but established a dangerous precedent. Large groups of armed barbarians living within the empire under their own leaders, owing only conditional loyalty to Rome. When Theodosius died in 395, he divided the empire between his two sons. Arcadius received the east, Honorius the west. This division, intended as an administrative convenience, became permanent. Never again would the Roman Empire be ruled by a single emperor from a single capital. The empire was now decisively split into two entities that, while considering themselves parts of one Roman whole, would increasingly follow separate paths. The Western Empire would fall within a century. The Eastern Empire would endure for 1,000 years more. The 5th century witnessed the disintegration of the Western Roman Empire, a process that still fascinates and horrifies historians. How could an empire that had dominated the Mediterranean world for 5 centuries collapse in just a few generations? The answer lies in a combination of military pressure, economic decline, political dysfunction, and social transformation. The immediate cause was the movement of peoples across and within the empire's borders. The Huns, under their formidable leader Attila, terrorized both Romans and Germans. The Vandals, Alans, and Suevi crossed the frozen Rhine in the winter of 406, entering Gaul when the river froze solid, allowing their entire peoples, not just warriors but families and wagons, to cross. They devastated Gaul before moving into Spain. The Visigoths, the Gothic people who had settled in the Balkans, grew dissatisfied with their treatment by the Eastern Empire. Under their king Alaric, they invaded Italy. In 410, Alaric's forces sacked Rome itself, the first time the Eternal City had fallen to foreign enemies in 800 years. The psychological impact was immense. Jerome, then in Bethlehem, wrote that the city which had taken the whole world was itself taken. For pagans, the sack proved that abandoning the old gods had brought disaster. Christians struggled to explain how God allowed his empire's capital to be ravaged. Augustine of Hippo, one of Christianity's greatest theologians, responded with the city of God, arguing that earthly empires were temporary and imperfect, that Christians' true citizenship was in the heavenly Jerusalem, not earthly Rome. This theology helped Christians make sense of the empire's collapse, but also psychologically distanced them from defending the state, seeing earthly politics as less important than spiritual concerns. The Western Empire's problems compounded. Britain was abandoned in 410 when the Emperor Honorius, besieged by problems closer to home, wrote to British cities telling them to see to their own defences. Roman rule in Britain ended. The province fragmented into competing kingdoms and was eventually conquered by Anglo-Saxon invaders from across the North Sea. Spain fell largely under Visigothic control. Africa, the Western Empire's breadbasket, was conquered by the Vandals under King Gaiseric between 429 and 439. The Vandals established a kingdom based in Carthage and used their naval power to raid throughout the Mediterranean, even sacking Rome again in 455. The Western imperial government, based in Ravenna in northeastern Italy, rather than Rome after 402, controlled little more than Italy and some of Gaul. Real power rested with barbarian generals commanding mostly barbarian armies fighting nominally for the empire. The Western emperors became puppets manipulated by powerful military commanders of Germanic origin. Stilicho, a Vandal, served as the power behind the throne in the early 5th century until his assassination in 408. Ricimer, a Suevi, made and unmade emperors in the 460s. Orestes, a Roman who had served as Attila's secretary, seized power in 475 and placed his young son Romulus Augustus on the throne, though the boy was never recognised outside Italy. In 476, Germanic soldiers in Italy, tired of being denied land to settle, rebelled under their leader Odoacer. They deposed Romulus Augustus, pensioning off the teenage emperor. But Odoacer did something different. He did not proclaim himself emperor. Instead, he declared that the West no longer needed its own emperor. He sent the imperial regalia, the crown and purple robes, to Constantinople, acknowledging the Eastern Emperor Zeno as sole emperor of Rome. Odoacer would rule Italy as Zeno's viceroy, in theory, though in practice he was independent. This event, September 4, 446, is conventionally marked as the fall of the Western Roman Empire. The fall was not dramatic. Rome was not destroyed. No great final battle decided the empire's fate. Instead, the Western Empire gradually dissolved. Territory was lost piece by piece. Imperial authority became nominal, then non-existent. Barbarian kings established their own kingdoms within former Roman territories. The Visigoths ruled Spain and southern Gaul. The Vandals controlled Africa and the western Mediterranean islands. The Burgundians held eastern Gaul, the Franks dominated northern Gaul. The Ostrogoths, sent by the Eastern Emperor to remove Odoacer, conquered Italy in the 490s. Britain fragmented into Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. Only small areas of southern Gaul remained under direct Roman control, and that ended by 486. Why did the West fall while the East survived? Multiple factors explain this divergence. The East was wealthier. Its cities were larger and more numerous. Egypt and Syria generated enormous agricultural surpluses. Eastern trade networks remained intact. The East controlled the most economically productive regions while the West's economy shrank. The East faced less military pressure. The Sassanid Persians were dangerous but were themselves dealing with threats from Central Asian nomads. The Germanic peoples migrating westward generally bypassed the East or were redirected toward the West. Constantinople's location and powerful walls made it nearly impregnable, providing a secure capital the West lacked. The East maintained more effective government institutions and tax collection, and the East benefited from capable emperors like Marcian and Leo I who, while not brilliant, were competent and maintained administrative continuity. In the West, imperial governments simply ceased functioning. Taxes could not be collected from territories under barbarian control. Without revenue, the army could not be paid. Soldiers deserted or joined barbarian warbands. The remaining imperial forces were themselves mostly barbarian federates whose loyalty was questionable. Infrastructure decayed. Roads fell into disrepair, aqueducts broke, cities shrank as their populations declined, and their wealthy inhabitants retreated to fortified rural estates. Trade contracted. The monetary economy partially reverted to barter. Literacy declined. The complex, interconnected Mediterranean world fragmented into localized, poorer societies. Yet Rome did not truly die in the West. The barbarian kings who carved out kingdoms within former Roman territories were not enemies of Roman civilization, but its admirers. Most had served in Roman armies. They wore Roman titles and claimed to rule with imperial authority. They maintained Roman law for their Roman subjects. They minted coins with imperial images. They patronized Roman learning. Many converted from Arian Christianity, which most Germanic peoples had adopted, to Nicene Christianity, the faith of their Roman subjects. The Roman Senate continued meeting in Rome. Roman aristocrats maintained their estates and their culture. The Latin language evolved but did not disappear. The Catholic Church, with its hierarchy modelled on Roman administration and its bishops drawn from the Roman aristocracy, preserved literacy and learning. Monasteries copied manuscripts, preserving classical knowledge that would otherwise have been lost. The Pope in Rome, freed from imperial control, gradually assumed greater authority, filling the power vacuum left by the empire's collapse. The fall of the Western Empire was not the end of Rome, but a transformation. The medieval kingdoms of Western Europe were built on Roman foundations. They saw themselves as continuing Rome, not replacing it. Charlemagne's coronation as Roman Emperor in the year 800 by the Pope reflected this continuity. The Holy Roman Empire, established in 962, claimed to be Rome's heir. European law, language, architecture, and political thought remained deeply Roman. In important ways, the Roman Empire never fell in the West, but rather metamorphosed into something different. But one part of the empire did not fall, did not transform into successor kingdoms, and did not need to claim continuity because it never broke. The Eastern Roman Empire, soon to be called Byzantine, endured. While the West fragmented, the East remained united, prosperous, and powerful. It preserved not just Roman institutions and culture, but the empire itself. For the Romans in Constantinople, there had been no fall. The empire continued, and it would continue for another 1,000 years. The 6th century began with the Roman Empire divided but not dead. In the east, the empire centered on Constantinople remained powerful and prosperous. The emperors in Constantinople ruled territories stretching from Greece to the borders of Persia, encompassing modern-day Turkey, Syria, Egypt, and parts of North Africa around Cyrenaica. They commanded substantial armies, collected taxes efficiently, and presided over thriving cities. Meanwhile, the West had fractured into barbarian kingdoms, but these kingdoms maintained Roman facades and acknowledged, at least nominally, the supremacy of the emperor in Constantinople. Into this world came Justinian, one of history's most ambitious rulers. Born around 482 as Petrus Sabatius in a village in Illyricum, he was adopted by his uncle Justin, an illiterate soldier who rose to become emperor. Justinian received an excellent education and served as his uncle's chief advisor. When Justin died in 527, Justinian succeeded smoothly, having already effectively governed for years. Justinian dreamed of restoring the Roman Empire to its former glory. He believed the temporary loss of the West could be reversed, that the barbarian kingdoms were usurpers occupying Roman territory that could be reconquered. His reign, lasting from 527 to 565, was consumed by this ambition, and by efforts to create an enduring legal, religious, and architectural legacy. Justinian was aided by capable subordinates. His wife Theodora, a former actress from a humble background whom he married despite social prohibitions, proved a shrewd political advisor and iron-willed partner. During the Nika riots in 532, when racing factions and political opponents united in a revolt that nearly toppled Justinian, Theodora's refusal to flee stiffened his resolve. According to Procopius, she declared that purple makes a fine shroud, meaning she preferred to die as empress than flee and live as an exile. Justinian stayed, and his generals Belisarius and Narses suppressed the revolt with extreme violence, killing perhaps 30,000 rioters in the Hippodrome. The revolt crushed, Justinian's authority was never seriously challenged again. Belisarius and Narses proved brilliant generals. Belisarius in particular ranks among history's great military commanders. In 533, Justinian sent him with a modest force to reconquer Africa from the Vandals. The campaign succeeded spectacularly. Within a year, Belisarius had defeated the Vandal king Gelimer in 2 battles, captured Carthage and destroyed the Vandal kingdom. North Africa was restored to the empire after a century of Vandal rule. Emboldened, Justinian ordered Belisarius to invade Italy and reconquer it from the Ostrogoths. The campaign began in 535 and proved far more difficult. Italy's geography and the Goths' determination produced a grinding war that lasted nearly 20 years. Belisarius captured Sicily, then southern Italy, and finally Rome itself in 536. But the Goths, led by their capable king Totila, fought back fiercely. The war became a stalemate of sieges and counter-sieges that devastated the Italian peninsula. Cities changed hands multiple times. The population plummeted. Agriculture collapsed. Rome, which had once housed 1 million people, was repeatedly besieged, captured and recaptured, its population dwindling to perhaps 20,000. Justinian, suspicious of Belisarius' success and popularity, repeatedly recalled him from Italy and replaced him with less capable commanders. The war dragged on. Finally, in 551, Justinian sent the eunuch general Narses with substantial forces and adequate funding. Narses defeated the Goths in decisive battles in 552 and 553, killing their kings. By 554, the Gothic resistance had ended. Italy, or what remained of it, was again Roman. Justinian also sent forces to southeastern Spain, where they established a coastal foothold and briefly reconquered southern Spain from the Visigoths. By 554, the empire had expanded dramatically. The Mediterranean was once again partially a Roman lake. Justinian could claim to have restored much of Rome's western territories. But the conquest came at enormous cost. The Gothic Wars devastated Italy, leaving it impoverished and depopulated. The empire's resources were strained maintaining these expensive conquests. Defending the long Persian frontier remained necessary, diverting resources from the west. The Balkans were neglected, allowing Slavic peoples to begin migrating into imperial territory. And a catastrophe struck that dwarfed all human conflicts. In 541, plague appeared in Egypt, likely arriving via trade routes from East Africa or India. The disease, probably bubonic plague caused by Yersinia pestis bacteria, carried by fleas on rats, spread throughout the Mediterranean world with horrifying speed and lethality. The Plague of Justinian, as it became known, killed millions. In Constantinople at its height, the disease reportedly killed 10,000 people per day. Procopius, our best source, provides graphic descriptions of symptoms and mass death. Bodies piled up faster than they could be buried. The empire's population may have dropped by between 25 and 50%. The economic and military implications were staggering. Tax revenue collapsed. Military recruitment became difficult. The plague returned in subsequent waves throughout the rest of the century, preventing recovery. Despite these disasters, Justinian's legacy extended beyond military conquest. He commissioned the Corpus Juris Civilis, the body of civil law, a comprehensive codification and rationalization of Roman law. A commission of legal experts, led by Tribonian, compiled all existing imperial laws, eliminated contradictions, and organized everything systematically. The resulting work, completed by 534, included the Codex Justinianus, containing imperial laws, the Digesta, excerpts from the writings of classical legal commentators, the Institutiones, a legal textbook, and later the Novellae, new laws issued by Justinian himself. This legal corpus became the foundation of civil law throughout Europe. Its influence persists in modern legal systems across the world. Concepts like the presumption of innocence, property rights, contract law, and many others were preserved and transmitted through Justinian's codification. Justinian was also a prodigious builder. He constructed fortifications throughout the empire. He built churches, including the magnificent Hagia Sophia in Constantinople, still standing after nearly 15 centuries. Designed by Anthemius of Tralles and Isidore of Miletus, Hagia Sophia was completed in just 5 years, from 532 to 537. Its massive dome, seeming to float on light, created an interior space unlike anything previously attempted. Justinian allegedly said upon entering the completed church, "Solomon, I have surpassed you," comparing it to Solomon's temple in Jerusalem. Hagia Sophia remained the largest cathedral in the world for nearly 1,000 years. Justinian involved himself deeply in theological controversies, attempting to enforce religious uniformity. His efforts to reconcile monophysite Christians who believed Christ had one divine nature with Chalcedonian Christians who believed Christ had both divine and human natures largely failed and created resentment in Egypt and Syria, where monophysitism was strong. This religious division would have consequences when these provinces faced later invasions. Justinian died in 565, having outlived most of his contemporaries, including Theodora. His reconquests were his most visible achievement, but they proved unsustainable. The empire lacked the resources to hold Italy long-term. Within 3 years of Justinian's death, the Lombards, a Germanic people, invaded northern Italy and established a kingdom that reduced Byzantine control to the Exarchate of Ravenna, Rome, and southern Italy. Spain was lost to the Visigoths. Only North Africa remained securely Roman. More critically, Justinian's focus westward neglected the east. The Persian frontier remained dangerous. The Balkans were increasingly penetrated by Slavic migrations. The empire's population was devastated by plague. The treasury was depleted. Justinian's successors inherited an empire, stretched beyond its capacity, exhausted by war and plague, facing resurgent enemies on multiple fronts. Yet Justinian's reign represents the last time the Roman Empire controlled large portions of the West. After him, Byzantine emperors would focus on survival, defending their core territories rather than attempting imperial restoration. The dream of reunifying the Roman world died with Justinian, but the Eastern Empire endured, adapting and transforming into what we now call the Byzantine Empire, though contemporaries always called themselves Romans and their empire the Roman Empire. The centuries following Justinian's death brought repeated crises that tested the Byzantine Empire's survival. The empire that emerged from these trials was dramatically different from the Roman Empire of earlier centuries, transformed in language, religion, military organization, and territorial extent. Yet the Byzantines never stopped calling themselves Romans, and their empire the Roman Empire. The immediate post-Justinian period brought disaster. Emperor Maurice, ruling from 582 to 602, was a capable administrator and general who stabilized the Persian frontier and organized the empire's remaining territories into large military districts called themes. But he was overthrown and murdered by Phocas, a centurion who led a military revolt. Phocas proved incompetent and brutal. His reign from 602 to 610 saw the empire's position deteriorate rapidly. the Sassanid Persian Empire ruled by King Khosrow II used Maurice's murder as justification for war. Persian armies invaded Syria and Anatolia with devastating success. They captured Antioch, one of the empire's greatest cities. In 614 they took Jerusalem, removing the True Cross, Christianity's most sacred relic, to Persia. In 619 Persian forces conquered Egypt, depriving the empire of its main grain supply. By 620 Persian armies had reached Chalcedon, directly across the Bosporus from Constantinople. The empire was on the verge of total collapse. Salvation came from Heraclius, the son of the Exarch of Africa, who sailed to Constantinople in 610, overthrew Phocas, and became emperor. Heraclius faced an impossible situation. The Persians controlled most of the empire's wealthiest provinces. The treasury was empty. The Avars, a nomadic people, besieged Constantinople from the European side, while the Persians threatened from Asia. In desperation, Heraclius melted down church treasures to pay the army and launched a daring counteroffensive. Instead of attacking the Persian forces occupying imperial territory, Heraclius invaded Persia itself. From 622 to 628, he campaigned deep in Persian territory, employing innovative tactics and inspiring his troops with religious fervour, portraying the war as a holy crusade to recover the True Cross. His strategy worked. He defeated Persian armies in battle, ravaged Persian territory, and even reached the outskirts of the Persian capital, Ctesiphon. Khosrow was overthrown by his own nobles and murdered. His successor sued for peace. The resulting Treaty of 628 restored all conquered territories to the Byzantine Empire. The True Cross was returned to Jerusalem. Heraclius entered Constantinople in triumph, having saved the empire from destruction. He had transformed Byzantine military organisation through the theme system, dividing provinces into military districts where soldier farmers held land in exchange for military service, creating a more resilient and less expensive defence structure. He also made Greek the official language of administration, replacing Latin, acknowledging the reality that the empire was now centred in the Greek-speaking East. But the victory proved hollow. Both empires were exhausted by decades of warfare. Their armies were depleted, their treasuries empty, their populations reduced. And from the Arabian Peninsula came a threat neither empire anticipated. Muhammad, the prophet of Islam, had unified the Arab tribes under a new monotheistic faith. When he died in 632, his successors, the caliphs, launched an explosive expansion. Arab armies, motivated by religious fervour, desire for plunder and skillful leadership, burst out of Arabia and attacked both the Byzantine and Persian empires simultaneously. The Byzantines, exhausted from their war with Persia, could not resist effectively. At the Battle of Yarmouk in 636, Arab forces destroyed the Byzantine field army. Syria fell. Jerusalem surrendered in 638. Egypt was invaded in 639 and conquered by 642. By 650, the Arabs controlled all of North Africa east of Libya, the entire Middle East, and had destroyed the Persian Empire completely, incorporating all its territories into the expanding Islamic Caliphate. The loss of Syria and Egypt was catastrophic. These provinces had been the empire's richest, most populous regions. Egypt's grain had fed Constantinople. Syria's cities had been centres of culture and commerce. Now they were gone, along with roughly 2/3 of the empire's territory and population. The Byzantine Empire was reduced to Anatolia, the Balkans, parts of Italy, and coastal North Africa around Carthage. Constantinople itself was besieged by Arab forces in 674 to 678 and again in 717 to 718. Both sieges failed, partly due to Constantinople's massive walls and partly due to a Byzantine secret weapon called Greek fire, an incendiary mixture that burned even on water, devastating Arab fleets. The empire survived but was transformed. It became a fortress state, its society militarized, its administration streamlined, its culture increasingly focused on religious orthodoxy. The theme system became the primary form of military and civil organization. The emperor was increasingly seen as God's viceroy on earth, the defender of orthodox Christianity against heretics and infidels. Greek replaced Latin entirely. Classical learning declined as resources went to defense rather than education. The empire became, in many ways, a medieval state rather than a continuation of ancient Rome. Yet Byzantium proved remarkably resilient. Under the Isaurian dynasty beginning with Leo III in 717, the empire stabilised its borders. Leo successfully defended Constantinople against the Second Arab Siege, and then initiated a controversial religious policy that nearly tore the empire apart. In 726, Leo issued an edict against religious images, beginning the iconoclast controversy that would rage for over a century. Iconoclasm, the destruction of icons, was motivated by theological arguments that venerating images violated the biblical prohibition against graven images, but also by the belief that military defeats indicated God's displeasure with current practices. Iconoclasts destroyed religious art throughout the empire. Iconodules, those who venerated icons, resisted, often violently. Monks, who were generally iconodules, were persecuted. The controversy created a rift with the Pope in Rome, who opposed iconoclasm, accelerating the growing divide between the Greek East and Latin West. The controversy ended in 843 when Empress Theodora restored icon veneration, an event celebrated in the Orthodox Church as the triumph of orthodoxy. But the damage was done. Countless works of art had been destroyed. Relations with Rome had deteriorated. The theological and cultural gap between Eastern and Western Christianity had widened. Under the Macedonian dynasty, beginning with Basil I in 867, Byzantium experienced a military and cultural renaissance. Capable emperors like Basil and his successors gradually recovered territory. They pushed back Arab control in Anatolia, reconquered Crete, Cyprus and Antioch, and extended Byzantine influence in the Balkans. The economy recovered, trade flourished, Constantinople became again a centre of learning. Classical texts were copied and preserved. Byzantine art, emerging from the iconoclast period, reached new heights of sophistication. This period also saw the conversion of the Slavic peoples to Orthodox Christianity. Saints Cyril and Methodius developed the Cyrillic alphabet to translate scriptures into Slavonic languages. The Bulgarians, after centuries of warfare with Byzantium, converted to Orthodox Christianity. The Rus, the people who would become the Russians, were baptized under Prince Vladimir in 988, tying them to Byzantine culture and religion. This missionary success created an Orthodox commonwealth stretching from Greece to Russia, united by faith and Byzantine cultural influence. But new threats emerged. In the 11th century, the Seljuk Turks, a nomadic people who had converted to Islam, migrated from Central Asia into the Middle East. They conquered the declining Abbasid Caliphate and turned their attention to Byzantine Anatolia. At the Battle of Manzikert in 1071, Seljuk forces captured Emperor Romanos IV and destroyed the Byzantine army. While Romanos was released, the defeat opened Anatolia to Turkish settlement. Over the following decades, most of Anatolia, the empire's heartland and primary source of soldiers and taxes, was lost to Turkish beyliks, small emirates. The empire was also weakening internally. The theme system declined as emperors granted land to aristocratic families who created large estates, reducing the number of soldier farmers. The imperial guard, the Varangians, composed of Norse and Anglo-Saxon warriors, were effective but expensive. The fleet deteriorated as military resources focused on land defense. The bureaucracy became bloated and corrupt. Imperial finances grew precarious. In 1081, Alexios Komnenos seized the throne and established a dynasty that would rule until 1185. Alexios was a skilled diplomat who stabilized the empire through alliances and cunning. Facing Turkish pressure in Anatolia, he appealed to Pope Urban II for military assistance. His request contributed to Urban's call for the First Crusade in 1095. The Crusades profoundly affected Byzantium. The First Crusade succeeded in capturing Jerusalem and establishing Crusader states in the Levant. Byzantine emperors hoped to use Crusader forces to recover Anatolia, but the Crusaders proved difficult allies. They were often more interested in establishing their own kingdoms than restoring Byzantine territory. Cultural and religious differences caused friction. The Byzantines viewed the Latins as barbarians. The Crusaders saw the Byzantines as effete and untrustworthy. Subsequent crusades worsened relations. The Fourth Crusade, launched in 1202, never reached the Holy Land. Instead, influenced by Venetian commercial interests and Byzantine political exiles, the Crusaders attacked Constantinople itself. In 1204, they captured and sacked the city in one of history's great catastrophes. For 3 days, Crusaders looted Constantinople's treasures, destroying priceless works of art, stealing relics, and massacring civilians. The Byzantine Empire fragmented into competing Greek and Latin states. The Latin Empire of Constantinople, established by the Crusaders, controlled Constantinople and parts of Greece. Byzantine successor states emerged in Nicaea in Anatolia, Trebizond on the Black Sea coast, and Epirus in northwestern Greece. For 57 years, Constantinople remained under Latin control. In 1261, Michael VIII Palaeologos, Emperor of Nicaea, recaptured Constantinople when his forces found a gate left undefended. The Latin Empire collapsed. Michael entered the city and restored the Byzantine Empire. But the empire he restored was a shadow of its former self. It controlled only Constantinople, parts of Greece, and some Aegean islands. Anatolia was mostly lost to Turkish beyliks. Serbia and Bulgaria were independent. The empire's economy was ruined. The population was a fraction of what it had been. The Black Death, which struck in 1347, further reduced the population and shattered the economy. The restored empire limped along increasingly, reliant on Italian merchant cities for trade and on hiring mercenaries for defence. Civil wars between rival claimants further weakened it. Byzantine scholars, recognising their civilization's twilight, began emigrating to Italy, bringing manuscripts and knowledge that would fuel the Italian Renaissance. The empire's final centuries were a long decline punctuated by desperate attempts at survival. The 14th and 15th centuries witnessed the Byzantine Empire's slow death. The Palaeologos dynasty, which had restored the empire in 1261, ruled over territories that shrank with each generation. By 1400, the empire controlled little more than Constantinople, Thessaloniki, and scattered territories in Greece. The city that had once ruled an empire spanning 3 continents was now an isolated enclave surrounded by enemies. The primary threat came from the Ottoman Turks. The Ottomans emerged from a small beylik in northwestern Anatolia in the late 13th century. Under a succession of capable and ambitious sultans, they expanded aggressively. Osman I, founder of the Ottoman dynasty, began the expansion. His son Orhan captured Bursa in 1326, making it the Ottoman capital. Murad I extended Ottoman control across much of Anatolia and crossed into Europe, defeating the Serbs and establishing Ottoman rule in Thrace and Bulgaria. Bayezid I encircled Constantinople, capturing most remaining Byzantine territories. Constantinople was besieged by Bayezid in 1397. The city appeared doomed. But salvation came from an unexpected source. Timur, known in the West as Tamerlane, a Turco-Mongol conqueror who had built an empire stretching from India to the Mediterranean, invaded Anatolia. At the Battle of Ankara in 1402, Timur's forces destroyed the Ottoman army and captured Bayezid himself. The Ottoman state fragmented as Bayezid's sons fought for succession. Constantinople was granted a reprieve that would last 50 years. The Byzantines used this breathing space desperately but ultimately futilely. Emperor Manuel II travelled to Western Europe seeking aid, visiting Italy, France and England. He received sympathy but little practical help. The West viewed Byzantium as an exhausted state, its fall inevitable. Western princes faced their own problems, the 100 Years' War between England and France, internal conflicts, and plague outbreaks. The Byzantine emperors, desperate for Western military assistance, were willing to pay almost any price. The major obstacle to Western aid was the religious schism between the Catholic and Orthodox churches. Since 1054, when mutual excommunications had formally split Christianity, the two churches had been separate. Theological disputes, particularly regarding the Filioque clause in the Nicene Creed, which Western Christians had added and Eastern Christians rejected, and disputes over papal authority, which the East refused to recognise, kept the churches divided. In 1439, Emperor John VIII attended the Council of Florence, where Byzantine and Catholic theologians attempted to reconcile. Under intense pressure and with few options, the Byzantine delegation agreed to union with Rome, accepting Catholic doctrine and papal supremacy. The Union of Florence was proclaimed. But when the Byzantine delegation returned home, the union was overwhelmingly rejected by the Byzantine people and clergy. The famous Byzantine scholar Lucas Notaras allegedly declared, "Better the Sultan's turban than the Cardinal's hat," expressing the view that foreign conquest was preferable to religious submission. The union never took effect. Western aid did not materialise. Meanwhile, the Ottomans recovered from their civil war. Murad II reunified the Ottoman territories and resumed expansion. His son, Mehmed II, who came to the throne in 1451 at age 19, was brilliant, ambitious, and determined to capture Constantinople. He made preparations methodically. He constructed Rumeli Hissara, a fortress on the European shore of the Bosporus, cutting Constantinople's supply lines. He assembled an army of perhaps 80,000 to 100,000 men, he gathered a fleet of warships. Most ominously, he cast massive cannons, including the giant urban cannon capable of hurling stone balls weighing over 500 kilograms. These cannons could breach Constantinople's ancient but still formidable walls. Inside Constantinople, Emperor Constantine XI. Palaiologos prepared for the inevitable siege. Constantine was the empire's last emperor, a capable leader facing an impossible situation. Constantinople's population had dwindled to perhaps 40,000, down from hundreds of thousands in earlier centuries. Large parts of the city lay in ruins or given over to gardens and fields. The walls, while still imposing, were poorly maintained. The garrison numbered only about 7,000 defenders, including around 2,000 foreign volunteers, mainly Genoese and Venetians. The most notable foreigner was Giovanni Justiniani, a Genoese soldier who arrived with 700 men and took command of the land wall's defence. The Byzantine fleet was tiny, perhaps only 26 ships, dwarfed by the Ottoman fleet of over 100 vessels. Constantine knew help from the west was unlikely despite desperate appeals. The Pope had called for a crusade, but only a few hundred volunteers arrived. Venice and Genoa sent minimal assistance, unwilling to jeopardise their lucrative trade agreements with the Ottomans. The siege began on April 6, 1453. The Ottomans surrounded Constantinople by land and sea. The massive cannons began bombarding the walls, their thunder heard for miles. The largest cannon could fire only 7 times a day due to the need to cool and clean the barrel, but each shot did tremendous damage. The defenders worked frantically each night to repair breaches, using rubble, timber, and even barrels filled with earth. The Byzantines achieved an early success when they stretched a great chain across the Golden Horn, the inlet north of the city, preventing Ottoman ships from entering. But Mehmed circumvented this defence brilliantly. He had his ships dragged overland on greased logs, bypassing the chain and launching them into the Golden Horn behind Byzantine lines. This audacious move forced the defenders to spread their limited forces thinner, defending the sea walls along the Golden Horn in addition to the land walls. The siege continued through April and into May. Mehmed launched several assaults, all repulsed with heavy losses. Ottoman miners attempted to tunnel under the walls, but Byzantine counter-miners detected and destroyed the tunnels. The defenders fought with desperate courage, knowing defeat meant death or slavery. On May the 28th, Mehmed addressed his troops, promising them 3 days of unrestricted plunder if they captured the city, as was the custom in Islamic law. The next day, May the 29th, he launched a final massive assault beginning before dawn. Waves of Ottoman troops attacked the walls, and the defenders, exhausted from weeks of continuous fighting and minimal sleep, fought desperately. The Ottomans concentrated their assault on the weakest section of wall near the Blachernae Palace. For hours, the outcome hung in balance. Then disaster struck the defenders. Justiniani was wounded by a cannonball or gunshot. He requested permission to withdraw to have his wound treated. Constantine granted it reluctantly, but Justiniani's withdrawal demoralised the defenders. Seeing their commander leaving, soldiers panicked. At roughly the same time, Ottoman troops discovered the Kirka Porta, a small postern gate in the walls that had been left unlocked and undefended through confusion or accident. Turkish soldiers poured through. Simultaneously, Janissaries, the elite Ottoman infantry, scaled the walls at the Blachernae section, where defences had weakened. The Ottomans were inside the city. Constantine fought in the final battle. According to tradition, when he saw the walls were breached, he discarded his imperial regalia so he would not be recognised, declared, "The city is fallen and I am still alive," and charged into the Ottoman forces. He was never seen again. His body was never definitively identified among the thousands of dead. The last Roman emperor died fighting in the streets of Constantinople, defending the city that had been the empire's heart for over 1,000 years. The Ottomans poured into Constantinople. What followed was the standard practice of contemporary warfare: 3 days of pillage and slaughter. Soldiers killed indiscriminately, looted homes and churches, enslaved survivors, and destroyed priceless artwork and manuscripts. Thousands died. Tens of thousands were enslaved. The great church of Hagia Sophia, where civilians had taken refuge praying for divine deliverance, was looted, its treasures were stolen, its frescoes defaced. On the third day, Mehmed, now styled Mehmed the Conqueror, entered the city and ordered the pillaging to stop. He prayed in Hagia Sophia, which was converted into a mosque. He declared Constantinople would be his capital, renaming it Istanbul. though the name Constantinople persisted in European usage for centuries. He began rebuilding the devastated city, repopulating it with forced migrations of populations from throughout his empire. The fall of Constantinople on May 29, 1453, marks the conventional end of the Byzantine Empire and the Roman Empire, a political entity that had existed for 2,000 years from the Roman Republic's founding in 509 before the Common Era had finally ended. The last remnant of the ancient Roman world was gone. Two small Byzantine states survived briefly. The Despotate of the Morea in southern Greece held out until 1460. The Empire of Trebizond on the Black Sea coast endured until 1461. Their fall eliminated the last independent Byzantine territories. The Roman Empire was truly finished. The consequences of Constantinople's fall reverberated across Europe and beyond. In the immediate term, Greek scholars fled west, bringing manuscripts and knowledge that enriched the Italian Renaissance. Byzantine diplomatic and artistic traditions influenced European courts. The Ottoman conquest of Constantinople gave them control of trade routes between Europe and Asia, which contributed to Western European exploration seeking alternate routes to the east, ultimately leading to Columbus's voyage to the Americas. For the Orthodox Christian world, Constantinople's fall was traumatic. Moscow positioned itself as the Third Rome, the heir to Constantinople's role as protector of Orthodox Christianity. Russian rulers began styling themselves as Tsars, from Caesar, claiming Byzantine imperial heritage. The Orthodox Church looked to Russia as its new champion. For the Islamic world, Constantinople's conquest was a great triumph. Mehmed fulfilled the prophecy attributed to Muhammad that Constantinople would eventually fall to Muslim forces. The Ottoman Empire, now controlling the strategic waterways linking the Black Sea, Mediterranean and Aegean, became a dominant power that would threaten Central Europe for centuries. But perhaps most significant was symbolic. Rome had fallen twice, the Western Empire in 476, the Eastern Empire in 1453. The ancient world was definitively over. The medieval period was ending. The modern age was beginning. The city founded by Constantine, the empire transformed by Justinian, the civilization that had preserved classical learning and Roman law, was gone. Its physical remains would be incorporated into the Ottoman Empire. Its cultural legacy would influence Europe, Russia, and the Islamic world. Its memory would inspire romantics and historians for centuries. The Roman Empire, which began when Octavian became Augustus in 27 before the Common Era, ended when Constantine. The 11th died on the walls of Constantinople in 1453 of the Common Era. Between these dates lay nearly 15 centuries of continuous history. The empire that ruled the Mediterranean world, that built roads and aqueducts spanning continents, that produced philosophers and historians whose works remain influential, that codified law and administration, that preserved and transmitted classical knowledge, that spread Christianity, had finally ceased to exist. Yet in another sense, Rome never died. Its influence permeates modern Western civilization. Our legal systems derive from Roman law. Our languages evolved from or were influenced by Latin. Our architecture echoes Roman styles. Our political vocabulary, republic, senate, citizen, comes from Rome. Our calendar is Roman. Our alphabet is Latin. The very concept of empire, of universal civilization united by common law and culture, is Roman. Every nation that has claimed to embody civilization, from the Holy Roman Empire to the Russian Empire to the American Republic, has invoked Roman precedent. The story of Rome, from the end of the Republic through the Byzantine Empire's fall, is a story of transformation. The Republic became an empire, the pagan empire became Christian, the Latin Empire became Greek, the Mediterranean Empire became an Anatolian empire, and finally a city-state. Through all these changes, the people involved considered themselves Romans, heirs to an eternal city and civilization. That civilization, in its political form, ended in 1453, but its influence, its legacy, its ideas, continue to shape our world. In that sense, Rome endures. The empire fell. The idea of Rome remains immortal.